Hello and welcome to this presentation of Creating an Ergonomic Shift Pattern by Richard Gurney as part of the Human Ergonomics in the Workplace module. Currently in the United Kingdom there are 3.6 million workers working shift patterns. This makes up approximately 14% of the workforce. In the NHS there are currently 120,000 24-hour care beds, all requiring round-the-clock staffing. What impact does this have on the workers? And is there a way we can reduce this impact? During this presentation, we'll be looking at the legislation that impacts shift work. What is the health impact on workers? What strategies can help? And what recommendations can be made for a new shift pattern? So let's have a look at a standard shift pattern from the place I work, the South Leeds ICS. As you can see, the shifts go from left to right by days, and each row is a different person's shift pattern. Some people have the shifts spread out quite nicely, other people doing long runs of shifts. On this rota, E stands for early, late stands for late, and LD stands for a long day. Rest days are days off. Pay particular attention to the line just below where it says red team, where the arrow is now. This is a particularly bad run of shifts with a long day, early, 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 couple of rest days, and then a late, then another rest day, and then earlys, lates, earlys and earlys. A big mixture of shifts and a long stretch. So why is shift work bad for shift workers? Well, the evidence shows that there are three main risk factors. First, the interruption of the body's circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is the natural rhythm of the body which operates at different speeds and ways in different times of the day. For instance, blood pressure changes during the day, body temperature, and the amount of energy. If this circadian rhythm is disrupted, all of these factors can start to be affected, and this can cause an effect called shift lag, which is a bit like jet lag, where the body just feels out of sync with the rest of the world. The body takes a lot of its circadian rhythm cues from the natural environment around it, so temperature outside, daylight, and eating and sleeping patterns. The body's very slow to adapt. So working, for instance, 2 night shifts in a row would not give the body time to react, but it would start the process. So when you came off a night shift, you would have the same process again of feeling shift lag. Sleep disturbance is also a big factor for shift workers. Not just night workers, but early and late workers as well, who can often find it difficult to sleep or have to wake early. This can cause a reduction in the quality and quantity of sleep. Can cause an effect called sleep debt, where you have reduced sleep day after day after day and you never manage to catch up with that, and can have an impact on work performance, your safety, for instance when driving to and from work or at work, and your personal well-being. Fatigue is a combination of the two previously mentioned impacts and can have a longer term impact of people not being able to catch up on sleep, to get back into a good body rhythm, a good rhythm of eating and sleeping and working and leisure time. It can cause a dramatic impact on work performance and lifestyle. It can also affect personal life, with people not being able to get good quality time at home. There are other risk factors associated with shift patterns, more physical problems, for instance digestive difficulties, increased fertility problems, specifically in women, chronic gastritis and peptic ulcers, cardiovascular problems, increased incidence of minor illnesses such as cold and flu because of the effect on the immune system, a disruption of the domestic life with people not being able to spend time with family and friends, and increased incidence of depression and mood disorders. So what legislation covers shift work? Well, there isn't any specific legislation that covers shift work. However, the following three pieces of legislation do have an impact. The Working Time Directive is a piece of legislation from the European Commission and has an impact on the number of hours and the type of shifts people can work. So employees are only allowed to work a maximum average of 48 hours per week, have a minimum rest period of 11 hours each day between shifts, a minimum of at least 24 hours of complete rest over 7 days, a minimum of 4 weeks annual leave per year, and work no more than 8 nighttime hours in any 24-hour period. The Health and Safety at Work Act doesn't specifically discuss shift patterns, but it does put a responsibility on the employers to create a healthy and safe work environment, which includes shift patterns and hours. The employers also have a responsibility to protect the public and other workers from conditions like fatigue of other employers that might put them at risk. Employees also have a responsibility under the Health and Safety at Work Act to ensure that they're in a healthy and appropriate frame of mind when they go to work. The health and safety consultation with staff legislations and regulations impact on how shift patterns can be changed. So they ensure that employers consult with workers and union representatives regarding changes of shifts and working patterns. They ensure that workers have the opportunity to discuss changes with employers, and they legislate timescales within which these changes can be made. So what theories underpin creating a good shift pattern? Well, the main theory that relates to shift patterns is something called the destabilization theory, which says that there are 3 main areas of life which need to be completed and facilitated for a human being to operate well. These are work, sleep, and social interactions. Destabilization theory says that the reason people get shift lag and feel unwell after working shifts is not just a lack of sleep. Shift working has an impact on the physical and psychological well-being of a person. Each type of shift has a different impact, so it's not just one effect for all. It affects older people more than younger people because they can't cope with the change and the destabilization. And the long-term impact of instability has a higher health impact. Short-term instability can be managed by people who can just adjust things like the amount of sleep patterns or rearrange social events. But over a long period of time, not being able to, for instance, spend time with your children when they come back from school because you're working late shifts, or coming off a night shift and wanting to sleep and needing to sleep, but having to operate within the family home because it's a weekend and your children are home, can have a dramatic impact on a person's well-being. So over a long period of time, destabilization theory says that working long periods of shifts can create insomnia, depressed mood, reduced motivation towards activity, behavioural change, increased compensatory factors such as smoking, drinking, and use of night sedation. But it's not just the shifts themselves that impact on destabilization. There are other factors. These include the physical environment. If you're on a night shift, for instance, is it too bright? Is it too cold? If you're doing work that you should be doing in the day, is it too cold to be doing that work? Is it too dark? Should it be bright? The evidence shows that if you're doing work that is done in the day but doing it at night, for instance working on a ward where you might be doing a medication audit or doing personal care, the light and heat levels should be the same at night as they are in the day. Another factor is control. Human beings need to have a sense of control around their environment and their work processes. So within a shift pattern, how many of the requested shifts or being accepted? Are they completely out of control with the shift patterns? Are they never getting the opportunity to choose their days off, or are they getting complete control over it? And workload. Workload has a massive impact on destabilisation. Are we expecting staff at the night, for instance, to do too much? Or are we not giving them enough to do, which can cause drowsiness and wanting to sleep? Equally, on a late shift, are we asking people to do a lot of physical activity when they are naturally becoming more tired? Or on an early shift in the early morning, when people aren't awake, are we asking them to take in lots of information through handovers very quickly, or expecting them to get up to speed with their work very quickly? All of these factors have a destabilizing influence on a person. Okay, so given that we will always need people to work on a 24-hour shift system in areas like healthcare, how can we reduce the impact? Firstly, we reduce the number of unsocial shifts to a minimum. So, how many people do you need at night working? How many people do you need on a late and an early? Is there capacity for a crossover shift in the day, which would be more beneficial to the circadian rhythm? Is that when most of the work is done? Keep the number of any one type of shifts in a row to a maximum of 3. So that's 3 earlies or 3 lates or 3 nights. The number of consecutive shifts in a row should be kept to a minimum, but should never exceed 6. The evidence shows that after 6, fatigue sets in, sleep debt is increased, and performance decreases. If people have worked a long run of shifts, up to 6, then the number of rest days following should also be increased. There should be at least 24 hours rest in between a change of shift type, so a change from an early to a late or a late to a night, and more for a night shift. There should be a forward rotation of shifts. Human beings, the evidence shows, work better if shifts go from early to late to night back to early, rather than the other way around. This also increases the amount of rest time in between each shift, as there's a bigger gap between starting an early and starting a late shift on the next day than there is between finishing a late and starting an early. Shifts should never exceed 9 hours. Although 12-hour shifts are often thought to be popular with staff, there's evidence shows that after 8 or 9 hours, the level of concentration and attention drops dramatically. So 12-hour shifts should be avoided if possible. A maximum amount of notice should be given between changes of shift patterns and when the rota is released to staff, so that they can plan social engagements and rest time appropriately. So let's have a look at a good ergonomic shift pattern. It's the same as before, with the days going from left to right, with one row representing one person. And this shows shift patterns that could start on earlies, lates, nights, or a rest. The pattern remains constant for all of them. So you have 3 of one shift on the top row, early shifts, and a rest day, then some late shifts and another rest day, 2 nights, because nights have more impact, and then 2 rest days because of that higher impact. Then you go back onto earlies. The rotation is forwards, earlies, late, nights, earlies. And that doesn't matter whether you start on an early, a late, or a night. On the second row, for instance, you start on a late, then have a rest days, then nights, then rest days, then earlies, rest days, then back to lates. The pattern is always forwards. So, in conclusion, there will always be a need for shift workers to work 24 hours a day. This will always have an impact on a person's health and well-being. However, it is possible to make that impact as small as possible. You can do this by sensible shift design and thinking in an ergonomic manner. The employee will also always have a responsibility to ensure that they use their rest days appropriately. If there is a good work-life balance, then the risk that the person can be reduced. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.